Hi, I'm Jeff Murphy, and today we're talking about blending modes in Adobe Photoshop. Um, we're going to use this image called Raft that I recently completed that uses a lot of blending modes. I use these pretty heavily to create better blends than you normally would have just by cutting and pasting items from one document to the other. And this is composed of a lot of different things: the rocks, the rivets, the bird on the raft, charcoal here, the charcoal down here. There's a lot of things that are happening in here that create blending modes. These valves we'll look at pretty closely that seem to be coming out of the rocks. All these things. And this piece actually, let me flip over here to Firefox real quick. Actually runs as a QTVR, a QuickTime panorama. It's actually Flash based, but you can do QuickTime based too, where the user can move around inside the space and examine it within the browser. Alright. That's how that works. So I'll go ahead and minimize that. Go back here to Photoshop. Alright, so blending modes. First thing we're going to need is our layers. So we can go up to our window and layers, and there they are. There's quite a few layers here. The first thing I'm going to do is go through here and show you how this is put together. The blending modes layer, actually let's start there, because the blending modes I made for a very specific reason. I did gray, very saturated red, and black, so that when we leaf through these modes by using the plus or minus on our keyboard, and of course you have to hold down the shift modifier to get the plus or to get the minus, so shift plus or shift minus, and let you cycle through these modes. So let me blow this up a hair so you can see very closely what's happening here in this area in the center where I have some gray and I have some red and I have some black. And we'll set some, this begins with normal. We're going to go through all these modes, and we'll have our tool set to move, because you need that set to move for this to work. So shift and plus lets us start from the top and go down. There's dissolve mode. You might be able to see, let me blow it up even more. You can see the little rough area around this. I never use that mode, first of all, because it looks like the dissolve mode in Photoshop. Alright, darken, I use quite a bit. You saw what happened there. The texture of the black dots came through, but all the light areas are unaffected. Multiply is similar, except it actually, if you look at the gray over here, it actually made the gray darker because it's combining it with the lighter grays behind it. It's multiplying them together. There's some color burn. It's very similar. A lot of these are, the explanation would be far too technical and above me to describe what's happening technically with the processing. But I'm a visual artist, so I look at everything visually. There's darker color. There's lighten. You can see all the black text just dropped out because the precedence goes to the lighter areas beneath. Screen, I actually use that quite a bit too. Color dodge, linear dodge. Lighter color hardly has any effect. You see some light red dots from this white specks in there. Overlay I use quite a bit. Would not work for this because it dropped out our blending word. But you can simply cycle through these. We'll cycle through till we get back to normal. Oops. Okay, normal. And I'll turn it off because we don't really need that, and go back a little bit here to our beginning raft picture. Okay, so with this, I'm going to click and drag to turn all these off, and we'll start from the basic photograph of the creek behind my house, which has been modified a bit. I had to add some bubbles in the front. I had to increase my canvas to add some of this to give it a lot of depth. I need more area to drop my raft in. So there's been some editing done to this in a previous incarnation of this. And I selected all the sky and just deleted it because I wanted to put my own sky and horizon in there. It had houses over here and some bunch of trees, lots and lots of trees, all gone. Alright, I made a second copy of this layer, background copy. It's set to soft light, and all it does, it's just to provide the look that I'm looking for. I needed something that's going to work with the charcoal, so I need something that's the highlights are a little bit higher key and the shadows are a little bit darker, and this worked a little bit different than just changing my levels. So I used the soft light mode. You'll see I use this a lot where I have two of the same layers in one set to different mode and they're combined visually. Alright, here's the bottom streak. It's a charcoal drawing. If I was to set this to normal, you would see the paper, which is like a light gray. But I drop it out by setting it to darken. It looks a lot better and a lot more integrated into the water. Here are the valves over here, also set to darken. They're drawn on a white sheet of paper. Actually, it's sort of a tannish. You'll see this in a moment when we're going to actually work with this valves piece. So that's set to darken. There's my bird. There's actually two copies of the bird. There's one above it, but it's a few layers above because I wanted to, first of all, desaturate this bird with an adjustment layer, which, remember, adjustment layers are awesome. They are right down here. This little icon adds an adjustment layer where you have all these different guys to pick from. Remember, these are non-destructive, so you can add adjustment layers. Like if you find yourself going up here to add an adjustment layer, don't do it up here. Do it right down here, because these are non-destructive. These will add an adjustment layers. The adjustments themselves are up here. These have been in the older versions of Photoshop, and you can still use them for small things, but if it's possible, which it is most of the time, it's much better to use an adjustment layer. Alright, here's one of my textures. I'll show you that original picture in a moment. It's just charcoal from a drawing I did. There's another copy of my bird. If I blow let's go ahead and blow him up a little bit. Okay, here's my original bird. I added the hue saturation adjustment layer to desaturate it a little bit. I didn't want him quite so saturated, but I still wanted him to have a little bit of color because he's sort of the focal point of the whole piece. There's a layer of texture there, and then another bird sandwiched on top because the texture, when it was above both birds, affected it in a little bit different way, so I needed this ordering of things. And this bird right here is overlay mode that I'm just using here. Notice it's set to 45% opacity. If I turn it up all the way, it's just way too contrasty. So 45% worked out pretty well, somewhere in there, to combine this layer with the layer below it. Alright, but this one's using overlay mode, and it's, if I turn this layer off and it was just overlay mode, nothing would hardly show up. Hardly anything would show up. Excuse the grammar there. Hardly anything would show up. Alright, the sky. Let's pull back up here. The sky is actually a real sky. With some clouds in there. It's a very faint sky. It's actually taken at the beach. It's a beach sky. And all I wanted to do with that is add some modification to the tonal range up here. So you can sort of see it, how it changes the tonal structure. Without it, everything was far too uniform and didn't really have the feel I wanted to, but with it, the tones are modulated in a more complex way. So you don't really see the clouds, but you feel the clouds. Alright, then we have a root down here. Oop, over there. There's my root. Set to hard light. Helped it blend in a lot more. It's set to normal. It doesn't really look like it's wet or in the water, and I would probably have to do some more selecting to make this blend better. It was just easier to drop a lot of that shadow detail out and set it to hard light. Worked best with that one. There's my eyelets. They're set to overlay. They work best that way, otherwise they just look like eyelets. Command Z to undo that change in the blending mode. Got some goo coming out of there. That's actually set to lighten. It's Elmer's glue on a black background. We look at that to normal. You see some of the black background. Plus it's set to 60%. See the difference there? That's crazy. I didn't even need to worry about just getting rid of areas like this because I know they're going to disappear. So, I don't need to make a selection. That's the beauty of these modes. I can just use these modes, these blending modes, to drop a lot of the stuff out. So, oh, we did light in there, didn't we? We need the white. White makes it come out. And since there's no white in the black areas, they just sort of disappear. All right, just the glue shows up, which I'm calling goo. We've got another levels adjustment layer for the whole thing. So zoom out with Command minus. And this layer we can just leave off. It's just for this tutorial. Okay, hope everyone is with me in that structure and the way that this is set up, because we're going to do the valve layer right here. All right, we'll go ahead and put that on. We'll toss this one in the garbage, and we'll start from scratch. So the first thing I'm going to do is change my view mode, my screen mode, to my standard screen mode, so you can see all my little tab documents. I can show you our original pieces. Here's the charcoal layer that formed the sky. See this horizon line right here? That's supposed to, I wanted this to feel like a body of water, highlighted body of water back there. And this is the horizon line. It's that crease in the paper. This kind of ironic. I make these really pretty complex drawings, and then I end up, and I let them sit out in the rain usually and get all funny, and then I photograph them, and I usually find myself a lot more fascinated to what happens sort of naturally with the charcoal than anything I've actually drawn. But it works that way because I want my stuff to look very distressed. All right, and here's the image of the valves that I'm using. All right, so it's a very old illustration from my wife's great. It's like 1980. This book is from 1885, when her great grandfather was in medical school. So we're going to use this piece. So I'll go ahead and select it, and I'll just feather this lasso about 8 pixels, and just draw a real rough selection around here. Because again, the beauty of this is that the blending modes will help us make this thing integrate really well. I will pull this out of here, and here's our target layer. So I can grab the move tool and move it, remember. It'll give me the little scissors icon, or if I just want to stay on the lasso tool, I can hold down the command key, and I know I'm on the move tool because it gives me the scissors. So I can just drag that over there. Alternately, by the way, I could have held down the Command and Option key to copy that over as well. And going from document to document is pretty much the exact same thing. So it's not a big difference. But if you see that, if you're holding down 2 modifiers, the Option and Command, that means copy. All right, and that's the scissors are the move. Should probably blow that up. Show you those icons. All right, the scissors for moving. And Option Command gives me the copy things, copy icons. And I could always do Command C and Command V to copy and paste, no problem. All right, I'm going to minimize this guy now because we don't really need him. And we'll come over here. Now you can tell that doesn't look great at all, right? We've got some scale issues, some color issues, some contrast issues. There's no charcoal overlay on it because we need to move this layer down. We'll do that last, though, actually. I'm going to turn off these levels even. No, I'll keep the levels on. We'll do the basic modifications first. And the first thing we need to do is drop out the color. So again, sometime your first inclination will be to go up here to your image adjustments. But remember, we can do this with an adjustment layer, and that'll let us change it later if we need to without being destructive to the pixels. So we can click on this Create New Fill Adjustment layer, and we can say, let's go ahead and change the hue and saturation. And we'll just pull the saturation out, pull it out as much as we want. We could even lighten it here if we wanted to, or obviously change the hue, and I'm just going to take that slider and drag it all the way to the left. Now, if I only want this to affect just this layer of the valves, which we haven't retitled yet, so right now it's called Layer 1, but we're going to retitle it to called Valves in a moment, then I can hit this little icon here, and if I let my cursor sit there for a second, it'll tell me clip, or click to clip to layer. All that means is if I click this, it's going to affect only the one layer under it instead of all the layers under it. So I use this a lot because a lot of times you just want to make an adjustment layer that affects the one single layer under it, not all the layers, which would be the default. So I can click that and then turn this guy off. So now I still have some little warm tones here in my bird and over here in some of my rocks. I left some warmth, and there's actually some little green moss in here. I've left all that there. But look what happened here. This got indented. See how it looks different from this other adjustment? This levels 1 affects everything below it. This hue saturation slider will only affect this layer, which I will now retitle valves. But you see how it's indented? That's clipped to the layer beneath it, which just means, again, that it just only is affecting the layer beneath it. All right. See how that works. Now I should transform this. So I can go to Edit, Transform, and change my valves. Now, best is free transform, which is Command T, because it'll let me do everything. If I just, depending on where I put my cursor, I can rotate this guy around, and I can hold down Shift and scale this. And again, Shift is so that I can keep the X and Y coordinates constrained. I'll blow this guy up so you guys can see it better. And when I feel like it's about the size I need it, I was going to put it right around here. I can double click to apply this. Now that looks pretty awful because you can see the paper around it. But I know because it's a pretty contrasty image and I'm actually going to make it more, I'm going to actually increase the contrast of it. It'll blend in here real well. Like for an instance, right now if I went and said, okay, darken this guy, I'd see some of the black dots come through, but this hasn't dropped out yet. And the reason for that is because it's not really white, it's gray. And in fact, these aren't really black, they're dark gray. A lot of the edges on my valves are not really black. So another thing I should do is change the levels on this. And with the levels, remember, it's the best way to change the contrast of something. So we can add another adjustment layer. Go down here and say, hey, give me some levels. And with this, I can yank these guys. See, here's my white slider. It's going to set my light grays to white. Now, it might be important. I probably will have to go ahead and edit this document just a hair, but not that much. You know, I don't want to push this so far to the left that I start to lose some of the gray tones in my valves. So I'm just going to come right to about the end of my little tiny histogram here, and I'm going to take this guy and drag him a little bit to the right to increase my blacks. Okay, so that helps out a lot. And again, let's move him around a little bit. Oops. Move my valves around a little bit. I actually had to do a little bit more, some more changes. Let's Command T to transform. It needs to be a little smaller. I had to make some other changes too to these valves because I needed to change how some of them fit on here. Like I wanted to move this guy down, but we'll do that last. So we'll select them individually last. So in this case, I do want to get rid of a little bit of this extra rough stuff around the edge here. So with that, it's no problem. I could use my eraser tool, but better to use a layer mask. Remember, I can click this. That'll give me a layer mask. With my layer mask, I can use a brush. If I paint with black, it'll mask some stuff out. And as always, I should blow this stuff up. And this is actually a lower resolution version than I used in real life. I'm going to shrink my brush with the left bracket, and then I can just go around and get the hard edge that I had before and fix a lot of this without having to do anything crazy. Like the bottom, I'm just double checking basically. There's not really anything that I need to worry about. The one area that I need to worry about is sort of right around here, where I seem to have a lot of rough area. Now remember, the layer masks are awesome because I can paint with black to mask things out. And while I'm on the brush tool, the reason I'm actually partly doing this is because, and then the right bracket to enlarge my brush. One of the reasons I wanted to show you this layer mask brush, and there's another whole video about layer masks because they're super critical and important, is because I wanted to remind you that there are these blending modes with your brushes as well. All your brushes, your rubber stamp, all those things have these same blending modes that you find in your layers palette. Alright, so these are very important because sometimes they're very important when things are not working. A lot of times my students will, by mistake, have this set to like lighten. So if you're painting with black and you have it set to lighten, like nothing's going to happen. See how it's not now masking any of this? As I paint over it, I'm painting over my valve and nothing's happening. It's because my brush is set to light and I'm trying to paint with black, so it's just not going to work. So these, by default, should be set to normal. Okay, so the blending modes are up in the tool palette as well for a lot of the painting tools. Alright, so I think I have pretty much what I wanted here. I'm going to make some slight modifications to this one here. And I could actually increase the heaviness of this line. Let's do that actually first, because this line's starting to fade out right around here and right around here. So I'm going to click back to my actual document icon for my valves, not the layer mask, but click on the actual icon there. And in this case, I'll make a feathered selection, and I'll grab the areas that are a little too light, just the top of these valves really. And I'm going to shift to get the top of this one. Actually, you know what? I could have just done it all at once, but here we go. Actually, I'm going to option select this stuff out of here because that's already pretty black. I'm afraid that'll get too dark. Alright, so I basically have a lot of these edges. And in this case, I need to adjust the levels again, but only for this area. I'm just going to go ahead and do it right here under my adjustment levels so I don't have way too many things I have to deal with in terms of layers. So I can take my black slider, move it right up there, and you can see how everything darkens. So this line is starting to come out quite a bit more. Looks better to me. Let's see what happens if I take my white slider and move it off. Do you want to change that just a hair too? The more I move these two sliders at the ends together, the higher the contrast. Not necessarily the better, but the higher. Remember, I also have a midtone slider that I can deal with too, and that's why I'm using my levels. Okay. There we go. Command D to deselect. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to move this guy around just a hair because I want him to fit better. Let's see, let's pull out a little bit. I should probably erase this little goober right here. But that looks pretty good. Now, remember these guys are all together now because these are clipped to this. If I want to make this easier on myself, probably what I would do. Okay, first of all, I'm going to edit this just a hair because it looks a little darker than I wanted right here. See this little area of darkness? I think I do not want that. So I'll go back to my layer mask, take my brush, just go over that real quickly. Oops, I gotta watch that edge there. Let me back up. Command Z. Try that again. I should shrink my brush with my left bracket as I get closer to that edge. Alright. Cool beans. Alright, that's what I wanted. Again, these guys are all hooked together. So I'm going to shift click them. I'm holding down the shift key. I'm clicking these three. I'm going to say new group from layers. And I could call it valve or valve group. I'll call it valve group for y'all so you'll know that that's a group. So now, if I want to turn all those on or off, it's a lot easier because it's one icon. It's no problem. Alright, and if I want to edit any one of those individual things, I can hit my little twirly arrow, little twirl down, And I can do whatever I want with these guys. Look at that. Look how this would look without that adjustment layer. Pretty awful. All right. There's my levels. Here's my actual valves. And remember, I put the layer mask on there, and you can see my tiny little black mask that I have around here. All right. Just to remind you that I also use a lot of the layering modes with the charcoal drawing overlays because I want this to look very destructive. So with this guy, all I did basically is take my lasso, put a small feather on it, and I could actually use my polygonal lasso as well because I basically need more of a rectangular shape. But I never use that because you can basically get that by holding down the Option key when you're using the lasso. So if I start drawing with the lasso and I hold down my Option key, I can do like straight lines. And I basically had just grabbed all this stuff here. And let me separate this guy again. And again, hold down the Command key, plopped it over here, ignore that, and you can see the matchup right there. Or this area here matches up with this area right here without it yet being rotated. Let me go ahead and turn off my texture right there. You can see my new texture. So it looks like that when I just drop it on there. Pretty hideous. Command T, so I could move the horizon line where I wanted it to. And then I hit return to apply that. But then when I said, hey, I can look at my different modes. Okay, overlay is not working there. I know, because I've done a million things with black and white, that the darken mode is what I want. So that's where I started with that. And then I can see where my horizon line is, right there. I had to go from edge to edge. I probably have to blow this up so you guys can see it. But from there, I just cloned a lot of this stuff. Took different, I feathered some of this, and I needed it bigger, but I didn't want to scale it up because I didn't want the dots, the little granules from the charcoal to get bigger. I needed them that size, so I needed more of them. So I just took pieces of this like this, selected them, and then held down the Option Command key to copy them. So Option and Command will let me copy them, and then basically just moved them down. And a lot of times, because that'll look kind of redundant, what might be a smarter thing to do is actually just flip this. Just go Edit, Transform, and flip horizontal. Lets me flip that over and then move it over on this edge so it doesn't look quite so uniform. It's going to be a lot harder to tell if this is a duplicate of this. And then what I would also do is use this in conjunction with the rubber stamp, the clone tool. Clone stamp tool, which is S, the keyboard shortcut. Remember, it's S. It says when I hover over that, it tells me what that little S in parentheses is my keyboard shortcut. I could take that, and the reason I'm actually doing this is for a reason, because I do want to point out one more thing about the blending modes before we close for today. I Option click to use this tool, remember, to set my sample, and then I could simply paint this stuff over. And I always use this in conjunction with the clone source palette you have now, because sometimes it's just helpful to either flip it or rotate it or flip it upside down. It can make it look much different. So I could paint the rest of the stuff in. I don't want that line right there. So basically I just filled in a lot of this with the rubber stamp, the clone tool, to make this look sort of organic. And finally, if I needed like a lot of, if I need, see how I have this real dense black area right here? Now I could always paint that on, but it'll look exactly the same if I just keep this on normal mode. But watch this. If I sample that same spot, Option click on that spot, and I set this to darken or multiply, let's do darken, and I come to an area like this. Let's blow this up again, so this is a little subtle, but very important. See these big chunks? See these big chunks of black in here? Well, This has a few big chunks of black too, but let's say I want to keep the texture that's already there, along with my new sample on my brush. If I set this to darken and I start painting, see, it doesn't just paint over it, it combines the previous texture with the new texture. And I'm going to uncheck this align sample. If you remember from our clone tool demo, this is super important little checkbox up here. That allows me, every time I let go of my mouse, it goes back to my original sample. So if my original sample was option clicked right here, every time I let go of the mouse, it returns to that spot. So even though I'm using the same source over and over again, because I keep letting go of the mouse, so it's returning to my same sample point. In fact, you know what? Let's take this sample right here. So we have to be a little bit more careful from the use a smaller brush. A little more careful because we don't want to get this rock right here. Although it is set to current layer, so that's not actually going to happen. But I can take little samples like that and really build them up. And you can't tell it's the same piece over and over because it's building up with a variation on the bottom, a layer below it. A lot of times, like if I wanted to make some smoke come out of here, I could just keep building this up. So it's like spewing ash. And I want to I've done this with a lot of other things, which is why I didn't actually do it with this one, even though I'm thinking, wow, that looks cool. Just because I didn't want to be redundant from my earlier work. Alright, so, and keep building this up, and you can't really, like I would actually vary the sample, but for the most part you can't tell it's the same sample. Okay, a little bit right there, because I got a little carried away. But between alternating little different samples and using this darken mode, I can really build this up very slowly. Alright, I'm getting out of hand here. So, that's the blending modes in Adobe Photoshop, and a lot of extra other little things thrown in as well. Alright, see ya.